Hello, and welcome to Freud's ego defense mechanisms. Before we start the ego defense mechanism, a couple things. One, remember that this all relates to Freud's personality theory, or that iceberg theory. So remember the id, all unconscious, the superego is your moral conscience, and your ego is partly conscious, partly unconscious. And if you recall, it is like your inner 2-year-old. It wants what it wants, pleasure, immediate gratification, aggression, that sort of thing. And it's thinking everything is immediate gratification, while the ego is saying, well, hold up a second. I want long-term pleasure, avoid long-term pain and destruction, that sort of thing. And the superego is kind of balancing the whole thing out, being like, oh, well, what is the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? Remember, you could have a very strong superego and be very guilt-ridden, and very weak superego and be sort of callous. But the job really of the ego is to manage your anxiety. Now, according to Freud, anxiety starts at birth. So it's the whole trauma of being born. You're expelled from your mother's womb, and you were in the situation where all of your needs are being met, and now they are met rather unpredictably, and that's where your anxiety is going to start. And Freud would have said that anxiety is there to keep us out of danger. Now, he said there are different types of anxiety. So a reality anxiety would be where the source of anxiety is actually real. Like you're in a burning building, that would cause a real or reality anxiety. You could have a neurotic anxiety. Neurotic, by the way, is a psychoanalytic term that in terms of diagnosing, it's not used anymore. It's outdated. It's not in the DSM. But neurotic anxiety would be a fear that the impulses of your id, the sexual and aggressive impulse of your id, will overwhelm your ego and cause the person to do something that they might get punished for ultimately. That would be a neurotic anxiety. And then you have moral anxiety. So this fear that you will do something contrary to your superego and will experience a ton of guilt. That's moral anxiety. So the ego's entire job is to kind of decide what gets let through to the conscious mind, what is allowed to push through the surface. So when it says wants something, the ego is going to be like, nah, that's not a good idea. I'm going to chuck it right back. The superego will play a role as well, but mostly these are called ego defense mechanisms because it's the id saying I want something, the ego saying no. So one of the Freudian defense mechanisms, this one gets used a lot, you might be very familiar with, is denial. So arguing against an anxiety-provoking stimuli by saying that it doesn't exist. So here we have a picture of somebody denying the end of summer. A lot of times you see denial with people going to the doctor and getting a distressing diagnosis. So rather than assume that the doctor was correct, they go out and seek other opinions and deny that this is going to be a problem. So let's say a husband doesn't notice all the obvious signs of his wife's infidelity. And when he finds out ultimately that his wife had been unfaithful, he could see ignoring all of those signs as just being in denial. Another ego defense mechanism is displacement, and yes, that's Chuck Norris, and no animals were actually harmed in that picture. So with displacement, you're taking out impulses on a less threatening target. So if your boss yells at you, you go home and yell at your spouse, or you get in trouble, your mom yells at you at home, you get in trouble, so therefore you go and you slam your door. You take out your aggressions on something that's less likely to retaliate. So the ego defense mechanism of intellectualization is where you're avoiding unacceptable emotions by focusing on what Freud would have called the intellectual aspects of them. So in the sad event that somebody dies, it might be easier to focus on funeral arrangements and getting food together and flowers and everything that needs to be done rather than your actual sadness and grief. A same thing could happen in, an event that causes a lot of stress but isn't so sad. Like, say, somebody's getting married and they're very excited to get married, but then they find that they're really stressful. And so what they'll do, this big stressful life change, although it's eustress, it's still stress, they'll focus on like everything being perfect, like the flowers and the DJ and every little thing has to be just so, as though anyone's going to notice that level of detail. That's where the whole bridezilla thing comes in. But that's really, you're feeling so stressful, it's easier to focus on those details than the actual fear that you might be having about the change that's coming up in your life. So, projection is placing an unacceptable impulse about yourself onto someone else. So, let's say that you're losing an argument with somebody. And as you're losing the argument, you just say, you know what, you don't understand because you're stupid. That would be projection. You're failing to convince them you're not understanding something, so you call them stupid. Some people would say that homophobia is a result of projection. And then I know I've already explained how I feel about this, that I don't even like the word homophobia because what people should be saying is sexual prejudice or in some cases sexual discrimination, not classically conditioned fear of gay people. That said, you will still find evidence of some people who are gay, who are living in an area, in a community, in a family, what have you, where it's not accepted. It's unacceptable for them to be that way, that they sometimes will try to hide it by acting against other people who are gay. And in that case, it would be projection. But I ask you to be careful when using that one as an example. Rationalization is supplying a logical or rational reason as opposed to the real reason. So rationalization would be like, okay, so I got fired from my job because I didn't kiss up to the boss. When really you got fired from the job because of poor work performance, maybe because you were always late, or because you were reading comic books while you were at the desk instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe because you saw sick days as vacation days. That would do it. You could see this with students as well. Oh yeah, I'm failing this class because the teacher doesn't like me, instead of maybe you're not doing well in this class because you're not doing your work, right? But you'll notice, regardless, the story that you put it in, explaining it away some other way than yourself would make you feel better. It will reduce your anxiety. Reaction formation is taking the opposite belief because the true belief causes you too much anxiety. So let's say you are in a situation where you don't like one of your parents. So let's say you don't like your dad, but you're not okay with not liking your dad because it's your dad and he's providing for you. And so you're uncomfortable. You got this push-pull. Here's this person who's supposed to be taking care of you, who you're supposed to depend on, and you don't like him, so you can't feel that way. You're not allowed to feel that way. And so you compensate by being really nice to your dad and acting like you really, really love your dad to compensate for the fact that you don't like them. And you see sometimes people do this where if there's a person that they really don't like, and let's say, they don't like them at all, and it's kind of known that this person doesn't like this other person here, and then you'll see them acting so nice to them. Freud would say that's reaction formation. They're just not comfortable sitting there with this dislike of this person, and so they'll act like they like them very much. Regression is the defense mechanism where you return to a previous stage of development. So when things aren't going well for you, you sit in a corner and you cry or suck your thumb or rock. You throw a temper tantrum when you're not getting your way because you have too much frustration, that sort of thing. Freud would say that I engage in regression when I get sick. At my age, I still call my mom, even though she's an hour and 45 minutes away, and complain to her on the phone that I don't feel well because it's my mom. So Freud would say that that's regression. You're not feeling well, so who fixes it? Your mom, even when she can't. Repression is probably the defense mechanism that's most likely to show up on your AP exam. It shows up more frequently than anything else. And I'm not even sure how much this definition will help you, so pulling into the unconscious. So what you'll want to remember about this is that with repression, you don't remember something that happened. So when your id tries to push this information up, your ego completely blocks it, and it does it all at an unconscious level, so you don't remember. So you might forget sexual abuse from, say, childhood, or like a rape, PTSD, that sort of thing, some sort of trauma, that you might just completely forget that it happened at all. So with repression, you don't remember something at all. That doesn't mean that you won't ever remember it. You're just repressing it right now. Sublimation is when you act out unacceptable impulses in a socially acceptable way. So it is a type of displacement that can be advantageous. One example of this could be if you have very aggressive impulses, you want to fight people, you like to hit people, that sort of thing. So you become a boxer or you play football, that type of thing. So you can take out those aggressive impulses in a way that's okay. So like I said, it's a type of displacement that's more advantageous, it's more acceptable. Though creepy when you think of other examples, like becoming a surgeon because of your desire to actually cut. Lifting weights to release that pent-up energy. So sublimation tends to be socially acceptable. And lastly, we have suppression, and that's pushing into the unconscious. I do need to distinguish between repression and suppression. In repression, you forget completely, you don't even know you know. With suppression, you're trying to forget something that causes you anxiety. So let's say you go somewhere and you're speaking to somebody and you say something and you're like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I said that. And then you're trying to forget about it. What you're trying to do is suppress that memory. You're trying to turn the page on that memory. But it's really hard to do. Trying to forget something isn't always that easy. In fact, I can think back to my childhood. We used to go to this like Santa's secret workshop because we celebrated Christmas, and we would go and like they would have you'd be there all day watching movies and that sort of thing, and these like little helpers who were like 6th and 7th graders, they would take you around and you can go shopping. You had this envelope with how much money you had and a list of people that you were buying gifts for, and you'd buy little trinkets, this type of stuff that little kids like to buy for people. And my sister and I would get home and show each other what we bought for everybody. And I remember one year asking her what she got for me, and she said, I can't tell you. You have to wait. And so I said, what if I promise to forget? And she was like, okay, you promise to forget? And I said, yes, I promise to forget. She's like, I got you a purple butterfly ring. Now, what's funny about that purple butterfly ring is that of all the years we spent giving each other these little gifts, that's the only one I remember was the one that I promised to forget. So there's suppression.